What if I told you Netflix just turned an honest, deceased woman into a fictional serial killer confidant? And what if I told you they invented murders that never happened in a story about a serial killer who was very much real? And what if I told you this is just the latest example of one man's obsession with making killers and victim stories dramatized to a extremely unsavory degree? Ryan Murphy has a problem, and equally does Netflix, because they're the ones that greenlit this absolute garbage. And together, they've built an entire empire on transforming real-life monsters into your next guilty pleasure. And with Monster, the Ed Gein story, he's, in my opinion, crossed a line that should terrify anyone who gives a flying frig about the truth. So today, we're lightly exposing Hollywood's most disturbing trend, and the man who's perfected it. All right, let's take an itsy-bitsy moment to talk about something I love deeply, and that is Raycon. Thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. And it's their anniversary! Yay! And their open earbuds are now 30% off right now. And honestly, these have become my new best friends for my daily grind. They're sleek, smart, and way cooler than your average earbuds. Because whether I'm working, commuting, hanging out with my dogs, or just winding down, they fit right in and make everything feel a little more fun. But what makes them different, Chris? Well, let me tell you. They keep your ears open while still delivering crystal clear sound. Because they sit just outside your ear canal, so I can stay aware of traffic when I'm going on a walk with my dogs, or if someone in the house needs me, without missing a beat of my somewhat eclectic music taste or my true crime podcast. And they're so lightweight, I forget that I'm wearing them. And they have an extremely secure fit with the way they go over your ear. So they stay put whether I'm doing a workout or just researching for a new video. And Raycon delivers the same premium audio quality as those big brands that cost twice as much. And with over 3 million happy customers and a 30-day happiness guarantee, why would anyone overpay? And the multi-point connection lets me switch between my laptop and phone seamlessly. And with 36-hour battery life, I charge these like maybe once a week, and I use them every single day. And you should too. And you can if you click the link in the description box, or you can go to buyraycon.com/KMK open to get 30% off the Essential Open Earbuds. That's buyraycon.com/KMK open. Thank you again to Raycon for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it. Hello everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, or welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Call Me Chris. You can call me Chris, and Auntie Chris is a little spicy mad right now. I'm not doing too great. I wasn't gonna do this video. Also, I'm still sick, sorry about that. Wasn't gonna do this video. I did make this video on Ed Gein about the real victims and what actually happened to them. And I lightly touched on the Ed Gein show, but it wasn't out yet. I was just saying, like, I'm probably not gonna watch it because they already look like they're butchering the story. Turns out I was right. I was right. You know, I got a lot to talk about, and obviously, let's just wave at the big elephant in the room. I make true crime content. I do. But what's important to me is getting all the facts right and giving you information you might have not even known that are part of those facts, and highlighting the victims of the story and the victims' families, and really just nailing in the coffin what pieces of shit the monsters, or the killers, are in those stories. And that is like the most important part to me. Not to mention, I do donate to victims' families around the globe in doing that. So it is very important to me. Of course, it's fascinating, and I'll get into that a little bit later. It's fascinating to all of us. There's a reason why I make the videos, but it also is important to tell the truth and not to make up stuff and romanticize stuff and dramatize stuff to make a better story. What a slap in the face to the people that got murdered or that went missing and weren't even a part of the case. We'll get into that too. I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated, okay? But we are going to talk about the show, and I'm just going to nitpick all the little things that are wrong. Maybe you'll learn something out of it. I highly suggest you go watch this video, though, if you want the full in-depth story on Ed Gein and all of the horrible things he did and like highlighting the victims' lives and all that kind of stuff, that's the video you should go to. Today, we're just gonna kind of graze over the show, also talk about some other shows that Ryan Murphy has done, along with maybe some other Netflix shows as well. Just really getting into it, okay? I'm feeling judgy. Feel free to judge me too. It's fine. But I feel like there's a line and I feel like it's been crossed. So first things first, let's first take a look at Netflix's #1 newest series. It is #1, by the way. It's been #1 for a while, which is kind of even more disturbing, but also makes sense. And that is Monster, the Ed Gein story. It's the third installment to Ryan Murphy's trove of not-so-true crime remakes, next to the Dahmer one and the Menendez brothers case, which is just, again, I think I did do a little bit of a in-depth take on that, and it's hard, it's conflicting. It's like, there's stuff that's really well done, but then he ruins it by doing this weird bullshit, by making up these weird narratives. It's like, I'm just gonna get into the Ed Gein story right now, okay? So episode 1 is called Mother, all right? And the series opens in rural Wisconsin with Ed Gein living under the control of his fanatically religious mother, Augusta. 1 point, that's very true. She was crazy and extremely controlling, who condemns all women as corrupt. True. Can we get a false and fact so we can keep count here? All right. So we got one truth so far. Mom was crazy and she didn't like women. All right. And then it goes on to Ed secretly spying on his young neighbors, Adeline and Madison, trying on lingerie, then returns home to engage in disturbing behavior, including wearing his mother's clothes and doing some not so, well, fun for him, I guess, some stuff to himself. Let's get one on the false thing. He never did that. He never peeping Tommed on Adeline or Madison. That's just made up. He also, as a 7-year-old child, was caught by Augusta and reprimanded for it, but there is no stories in which he did this as an adult. Could it be true? Sure. I'm going to put a loose false on that one, okay? I do want to say I don't mind that they're doing this because I get that they just want to show that they had this dynamic. Could they have done a flashback? And would it have been more accurate? Yes. But whatever. I'm not going to be too picky about that. So when Augusta catches him, she explodes with rage, and at a local diner, we learn Ed and Adeline know each other, and she shares disturbing Holocaust photos and Nazi criminal Isla Coke material with him, feeding his dark fascinations. It is true he was fascinated with Nazi photos and memorabilia and stuff that they did to them, so that's fine. Adeline wasn't a part of this. There's a loose claim that they had talked about this, so again, I'm not going to be like too nitpicky about this, but the whole relationship they made up about Adeline is completely false. It's completely false. There's a quote from her where she said that they had a relationship, but it wasn't until after all of this, and it was false as well. It was proven not to be proven. And also Ed was known to say that he had zero interest in having any sort of romantic relationship with any women. So this is like a whole conjured up relationship that didn't even exist, and that's what Ryan Murphy does best. He just makes up this bullshit to make the story more interesting and to get more episodes to sell his shit on Netflix. I don't know. So that's another false. And then the episode reaches its climax when Ed's brother Henry, exhausted by Augusta's tyranny, plans to leave and urges Ed to join him. That's true, okay? That did happen. And Ed responds by attacking Henry with a log and leaving him for dead, later burning the body and convincing Augusta it was an accident. That's false. Never proven. It was an accident. Henry died by execution, and yes, he did have some bruises on him. Could it have been Ed? Potentially, but it was never proven. So I don't think it should be in the show because it's not fact. And I think if you're having to fact check through a show, and as we'll see, I'm assuming it's going to be at least 50-50 on what's true and what's not. If 50% of the show isn't real and it's based off of Ed Gein's story, it's a bad show, in my opinion. People are watching the show because they're not crazy like you and me who watch and read a lot of true crime stuff. They take it as at face value. They think that is the case. And if they don't, then that's good. If they just watch it and think that, oh, this is clearly made up and it's just Ed Gein, then fine. But I think most people are like, whoa, he's crazy. Like that's horrible. And I can't believe he killed his brother. That's not true. And there was no relationship with Adeline. And there was no, I'm going to stop yapping. Let's continue. So that's false. And then soon after, Augusta dies of a stroke. And this is true, but it wasn't after. It wasn't until a couple years after, actually. So they kind of sped up the timeline to make it more convenient for themselves. Classic. So we got a false. And then hearing his mother's voice demanding he keep her close, Ed attempts to dig up her grave but fails. False. Never happened. So instead, he exhumes another woman's corpse and places it in Augusta's rocking chair. False. Never happened. He did exhume other bodies, but this wasn't till a long time after as well. So again, we're just speeding up the timeline for convenience. We don't know that he ever put a corpse in the chair. In fact, Ed Gein has never claimed that. So that's just a fun little thing for Ryan Murphy to just do because it's creepier, I guess. But it's bullshit. And then the episode ends with Ed gazing lovingly at the body and his grief and madness fully merged. So listen, first episode, I was so frustrated watching this. I was like, as a true crime junkie, I was like, how just wrong? How, it's like when you read a book and then you watch the movie and you're like, what is this? But it's even worse because it's real people. It's real people. And we're not even into the actual victims yet, which makes me sick to my stomach. Like, he should have just made a show like Psycho or like Bates Motel or like, Chainsaw Massacre. There's a reason why people make these fake serial killers instead of the real one, because you can go off and make stuff and you could do stuff inspired by something. But when you're putting Ed Gein's name on something and the actual victims' names in something, you have to tell the truth. In my opinion, it just doesn't fly with me. So let's move on to episode 2, which is Sick as Your Secrets. Guys, we are doing our biggest candy drop ever and our coolest with exclusive posters and a brand new product. I'm so excited! As you guys know, my husband and I, Caleb, own a candy company. We own it 100%. We make it right here in the middle of Texas. And it's Halloween, which means it's candy season. It's our season. And we have bundles that are live right now, along with new flavors. Right now, you can get 12 bags of candy, 11 stickers, Sour Ups, which is our new product, which is sour sand, and it's like different flavors, so you can make your candy more sour and just have like a beautiful mirage of different flavors. I was a big fan of Fun Dips growing up, so it kind of like taking that concept but doing it with candy, so you can mix it in the bag and mix it up. You could dip it. You can do whatever the hell you want with it. You can eat it out of the bag. I'm not your mom. You can do whatever you want, okay? Don't tell your mom I said that. And we have posters. We have 18-inch posters made by an extremely talented artist, Ray Dillon, who's an incredible comic book artist, and they're custom. They're so cool, and you can get 3 of them. And then it includes all of our October flavors, plus some extra strawberry strips and blue raspberry little guys. And besides those, the flavors are pink lemonade strips, cherry pineapple gummies, blue raspberry lemon grape strips, rainbow sherbet gummies, strawberry strips, and blue raspberry gummies, okay? It's a lot, and it's delicious. Not to mention, we have another bundle that has signed posters, signed by yours truly and my husband. There's only 100 of them, and I think there's only like maybe 30 left. So run, go get them now. And they're 24 inches, so they're even bigger than the other bundle. But make sure to go to the bundle page on sour.gg to see both bundles. We love creating all of these new crazy flavors for you guys and these new products. We're so happy that you guys love them too. I hope you guys have a fabulous Halloween, and I hope it's sweet and a little bit sour. All right, let's get back to the video. So episode 2 opens with Ed experiencing nightmares of Holocaust victims stemming from his obsession with Nazi material. I'm fine with this. You can have a little dream. That's fine. Whatever. The show then jumps to 1959 Hollywood, where Alfred Hitchcock, his wife Alma, and author Robert Bloch discuss how Gein's crimes will inspire Psycho's Norman Bates. And they explore how Ed's fascination with death began early, fueled by pulp magazines, and about criminals like Nazi Isla Coke, establishing the connection between Gein's real crimes and emerging horror cinema. And this is like also just very like, the way they say things is so like, whoa, he looked at this and this, and it went deeper than that, and I feel like there was more to it, but overall, they weren't wrong. He was infatuated with certain types of magazines and with Nazi memorabilia, not until later in his life though, but whatever, I'll let it slide, okay? So we'll give a loose fact. And then back in 1950s Wisconsin, Ed's relationship with Adeline deepens bizarrely. and she dreams of photographing crime scenes in New York. Well, he shows her a bowl made from a human skull, which she dismisses as dark humor. And when he invites her to meet his mother, Adeline discovers Augusta's preserved corpse sitting in a chair and flees in terror. All just completely false. None of it ever happened. What is even happening right now? But shaken, Ed visits Mary Hogan's tavern, where he suddenly shoots and kills her, dragging her body back to his farm while police remain oblivious. And yes, he did kill Mary Hogan, but the way they lead up to it, it's just not what happened with the whole Adeline thing going on. So we'll give a false and a fact. Because, yeah, I guess. And then the episode ends with Hitchcock directing Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates, showing him artifacts meant to mirror Gein's grotesque collection, cementing the link between real horror and Hollywood fiction. And here's where I'm like, okay, is this like a weird way for Ryan to be like, see, Hollywood always makes up stuff like I'm doing, which makes it okay? I'm like, no. Because the thing with Hitchcock is he's actually making a completely fictional movie with light inspiration from Ed Gein. You're just making a Ed Gein movie and putting your own random fucked up shit into the movie to make it more interesting, so you could sell it better. It's not the same. So if anybody's arguing like, well, he put lots of things into the show to be like, oh, well, like this is, you know, Hollywood romanticizes it and he leans into that with this. It's like, no, see, you gotta see the difference, you know? This is fiction. You know, Psycho, fiction. Ed Gein, not fiction. Anyway, let's move on to episode 3. And the next episode, made me upset. Okay? Episode 3 is The Babysitter. All right? This is Addison Rae's episode. First off, and I'll add this in as well, the acting, great. The acting from everyone, fantastic. The stylization, great. Cinematography, great. He knows how to make a good show, and we'll get into that later. So I just want to start with that. But this episode just revolved around a completely false narrative about a victim who likely died extremely violently, but is unsolved and absolutely was not one of Ed Gein's victims and was kidnapped, and God knows what happened to her. But Ryan Murphy thought, since she's gone and her whole family's dead at this point because of the year that this happened, he could just do whatever he wants and make up a story about a real human being who now is deceased and most likely died in a horrific way and terrified. And he just decided to just make up his own little story and make Ed Gein the killer. Anyway, episode 3 opens with Ed dancing alone in his farmhouse wearing his mother's clothes and a mask made from human skin, which we can safely assume he wore the masks he made, so fine. Was he known to dress in his mother's clothing? No, so a false and a fact, I guess. And when police arrive to question him about Mary Hogan's disappearance, Ed perfectly plays the awkward grieving son, claiming car trouble kept him home with Augusta, successfully deflecting suspicion despite witness placing his truck near Mary's tavern. He did not get caught for this, so fine. Later, Ed reunites with Adeline at the diner. Every time Adeline's name comes up, put it on the false, because it just didn't happen, all right? And despite her previous terror, she warms to him again. She shows him photos of a transgender woman, fascinating Ed with concepts of identity transformation, and he promises her a surprise. And that night, at a cemetery, Ed proposes to Adeline with a ring stolen from a fresh grave, and disturbingly, she accepts. This never happened. She does say later on, after Ed is arrested, that there was a proposal made. It was at her house. It wasn't at the graves. But then she retracts everything she said. So it could be an attention thing. It could be something that happened. But we know Ryan Murphy's going to take any little grain of salt and just make it into a giant iceberg. So, like, loosely kind of true if she was right, but it's not proven in any way, especially based off Ed Gein's accounts. He says that wasn't the case when he was very forthcoming about everything else that happened. So I'm going to safely assume it was false, but we don't know for sure. Anyway, the episode interweaves Hollywood's exploitation of the Gein story as Anthony Perkins becomes trapped playing Norman Bates, struggling with his own sexuality while studios demand sequels. And I don't mind this intertwining of the, you know, like Psycho being made and everything. That's fine, but I just wish the Ed Gein stuff was actually true. Then it would just make more sense. I think it just belittles everything else around it, in my opinion. So anyway, back in Wisconsin, Ed's behavior escalates when he babysits local children. And he did babysit local children. But in the show, he terrorizes them with decomposed heads as games, finally alerting parents that something's wrong with the town's quiet handyman. People actually liked Ed Gein. They actually liked him and they were fine with him babysitting. He was known to be a very good babysitter and not to torment the kids at all. So we're going to have to throw up another giant false. None of that ever happened. It's for shock value. It's not true. And that night, Ed abducts Evelyn. And this is the woman I was talking about where they just completely manufactured a story about a real person, and it frustrates me. But Evelyn is a young babysitter, and she recently recovered from polio. That's not true. And Ed murders her in the barn while forcing Augusta's preserved corpse to participate in the violence, signaling his progression from grave robbing to killing living victims. All of that's false. All of it is false. Ed never abducted Evelyn. He never killed Evelyn. He never put his mother in front of the victims to kill them in front and participate and all this kind of stuff. None of that ever happened. Evelyn Grace Hartley, born November 22nd, 1938, disappeared October 24th, 1953. And she was the daughter of a professor. And in the show, they have her babysitting 2 kids when she was actually babysitting one 20-month-year-old girl. Why even make up 2 kids? Like anything Ryan can lie about and just make extra bad, he does. And it just makes me so mad. But she was babysitting for the Rasmussen family in La Crosse when she failed to check in at 8:30 p.m. This is the real story, by the way, because I feel like we owe her this. And her father found the house with locked doors, lights on, furniture moved, and her belongings scattered in different rooms, and her glasses broken. And a basement window was open with pry marks and a stepladder positioned beneath it. And blood was found inside the house and yard, with bloody handprints in a nearby garage. And the baby was unharmed, thankfully. So police dogs tracked Evelyn's scent to Cooley Drive, 2 blocks away, where she was likely put in a vehicle. And witness Ed Hoffer reported nearly being hit by a speeding 1942 green Buick with 2 men and a girl inside. And he'd seen them earlier with the girl wedged between them holding her arms. And for the record, Ed Gein's car was a maroon 1949 Ford 4-door sedan, so not even Ed Gein's car. And days later, blood-stained clothing matching Evelyn's blood type was found at various locations, and over 1,000 people, including National Guard and Air Force, searched for her. It was like one of the largest searches in Wisconsin history, and every vehicle in La Crosse County was inspected. And in May 1954, controversial mass lie detector tests were conducted on local high school boys, but halted after testing 300. And in November 1957, serial killer Ed Gein was investigated, but cleared after passing 2 lie detector tests. And in 2004, a 1969 bar recording surfaced in which Clyde Peterson implicated himself and Jack Gulfair in Evelyn's murder, claiming she was buried at Lafarge. But both men had died by then. And Evelyn's parents moved to Oregon in the 1970s and have since passed away. And her case remains unsolved. So that's the real story about Evelyn. And that's all readily available online, and there is a lot more information about Evelyn. Also, she never had polio. That's just a weird thing he made up for the story, I guess. But this is a real-life human being who walked and breathed and had experiences. And then for like Ryan to make this up and for the actors to like look at that and be like, yeah, that's fine. It makes me mad. Like if that was my sister or if that was my daughter, I would sue them to the ground, but they're all dead. They can't do anything, you know? And I hate that people think that's okay. I don't think it's okay. And it's like, oh, it's what he imagined he could have done. It's like, no, you're dealing with a person that actually is, her case is still unsolved. So like that alone makes this show garbage to me, personally. I don't know why I'm getting so emotional about this, but it's just frustrating. Like if I was approached to do a role like that, I would outright be like, what is this? Like in doing 2 minutes of research and saying, this is so disrespectful to the victim and their family. I'm good, you know? And I don't want to be a hater and stuff, but like the quotes that I read, because I was doing research on this, and obviously, you know, there's quotes of Ryan Murphy and the actors and all the stuff, but Addison's quotes are just like so tone deaf. It was unbelievable. And she said in an interview, she was asked, "Tell us a little bit about your character and how she fits into the story." Addison Rae answered word for word, "Evelyn in the story is a babysitter to two really sweet children. I did research before I filmed about Evelyn. There's actually not much about her. There's a lot. It was the largest search for any human in Wisconsin in history at that point." Okay. They don't really know exactly what happened in real life, so it was really interesting for me as an actor to lean into something that there was minimal information about. You know that Ed Gein didn't do it if you did a minute of research, and you know that there is no evidence that she was killed. Like there, I would just be like, no. Like, what are we doing? But what do I know? Maybe I'm just too sensitive to this stuff. And then she was asked, "What do you think people find so interesting about the Monster Anthology series?" Addison says, "I think it's really wild to see a picture being painted that feels so insightful and honest and raw and challenging in a lot of ways. It brings so much light to things that maybe people didn't explore before. I didn't know much about Ed Gein other than what movies were made based off him." Seems like you still don't. Nobody does that watch this. If anybody watched the show and thinks they learned anything about Ed Gein, they didn't. They learned like maybe 20%. If that. Anyway, she continues, "So it was interesting to dive into that in a different way and also speak to Charlie, someone that had such an intimate understanding of who Ed Gein was." And listen, I'm not going to blame the actors because it's their job to act. And it's not necessarily their job to do the research on these subjects. They show up and they do the best they can. And they did a really good job. Like, actors did a really good job. But I think people are so like far removed that these were actually real people, and it's just fine to just lie about it and to make up stuff, even if it's like, it maybe in his perspective, that's what he thought in his head. It's like, no, you're talking about Ed Gein, so tell the real story. Don't leave things up to interpretation. You can't just like make it obscure and maybe this happened and maybe he thought that this could happen. It's just this type of stuff, in my opinion, shouldn't exist. And that brings us to episode 4, Green. And episode 4 opens with Adeline discovering the corpse in Augusta's chair and fleeing home in terror, with Ed following her. And when he corners her in the bedroom, she demands answers. And Ed calmly admits the body isn't Augusta, but a woman he exhumed, and shockingly, Adeline responds with fascination rather than horror, asking how it felt to dig someone up. Didn't happen. And what frustrates me about Adeline as well is that she is past. She can't defend herself. You know, parents obviously passed away. All these people are deceased, and obviously they may have descendants, they may not, but they can't defend themselves in any way. So they're just twisting her story into something that never existed. And again, maybe, you know, you could say it's what Ed thought or whatever, but it's not, because he's known to say that he had zero interest in women, and that's a documented fact. He was obsessed with his mother. We know that. He wanted to be his mother. He wanted to be inside his mother's skin. That we know. He had no fascination with having any sort of relationship with anyone. Again, just dumb. Just frustrating and dumb. And then Ed begins courting Bernice Warden, which never happened. He never had any sort of relationship with Bernice. And the lonely hardware store owner was charmed over her lunch and an ice skating date, even making plans to move in together. All false. Never happened. And this was like his first attempt at life beyond his mother's shadow, but hallucinations of Augusta calling Bernice a harlot prove stronger than any chance at normalcy. So Ed breaks things off with Bernice the next day, and when she protests, he shoots her in the head. And he drags her body to his barn, where he heavily mutilates and hangs it upside down in the show's most graphic sequence, which, yes, I mean, no, they never had any sort of relationship, so I don't even know, put like 10 more on this. It's all just bullshit. He absolutely did shoot her. He absolutely did take her back to the barn. He absolutely did horrible things to her and mutilated her body. And I'm sure Ryan Murphy took that and he's like, wow, I don't need to make anything up about that. That's grotesque enough. We can throw in that, like, we get one true thing and it's like the worst thing that ever happened. And when he shows the corpse to Adeline, which never happened, she's disturbingly fascinated rather than repulsed, leaning into her own darkness. It's just a completely made up thing, and I feel horrible for Adeline because none of this ever happened, and it makes her look like a really evil person when she was completely innocent in all of this. And the episode ends with a cut to filmmaker Toby Hooper, who's frustrated that Hitchcock's Psycho didn't go far enough, beginning work on what will become the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, showing how Gein's real crimes continue seeping into popular culture. Again, I don't mind this parallel. It's fine. But that's all made up. You know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho, all this stuff. It's grotesque and crazy, but I love horror, you know? We're not dealing with real people. So, whatever. I'd much prefer a documentary that's real and, like, you know, highlights the victims and how horrible the freaking monster that committed those crimes are. But this whole production is just sick. And that brings us to episode 5, Ice. And episode 5 shifts focus to Adeline's unraveling. And this whole episode could just be like omitted because Adeline's whole story is completely false. But anyway, it opens with her sleeping with a local farmhand, which we never knew about, signaling her detachment from Ed, fighting with domineering mother who wants her to settle down. Adeline dreams of escaping to New York as a crime scene photographer. Not true. Never happened. Over a tense dinner, she tells Ed she's leaving and urges him to come, but he's paralyzed by his devotion by Augustus' memory. Yes, he had that relationship with his mother, but there's no proof this ever happened. And when Ed pushes for intercourse and traditional family life, Adeline cruelly rejects him, mockingly suggesting that if no living woman wants him, maybe he should sleep with corpses. He never did that, by the way. There is no evidence and no confession that he ever did anything like that with the corpses. So that is a completely made up thing that Ryan Murphy thought would be just extra triggering. And I don't know, interesting to the viewer, completely made up. And this just triggers the show's most grotesque scene. And they drive to a cemetery where Ed does stuff with an exhumed body while Adeline watches, all fabricated. And Adeline heads to New York, but fails miserably. Her apartment is freezing, her job interviews bomb, and when she confronts her landlord about the heat, she snaps and beats the woman to death with her shoe, robbing the body before fleeing back to Wisconsin. This never happened. This has to be, like, illegal to say people did stuff like a full-on crime that never happened. Like, it's actually insane. This isn't even a part of, like, Ed's imagination, if you want to use that argument. She's just, like, off living her own life, and what she hurt somebody on Anyway, finding no comfort from her mother, who admits never wanting her in the first place, all made up, Adeline seeks solace with Ed, suggesting intercourse to rekindle their relationship, but Ed recoils, saying she's too warm and he can no longer connect with the living. And to prove her devotion, Adeline climbs into a bathtub of cold water while Ed dumps ice over her. And this is supposed to be like a chilling metaphor for how trauma has destroyed them both, but none of this ever happened. He never had relations with dead bodies. He never, you know, as far as we know, he died a virgin. So yeah. And then there's episode 6, The Buxom Bird. So episode 6 finally reveals Ed Gein's House of Horrors. And after a flashback showing Deputy Frank Warden asking his mother Bernice to host Thanksgiving dinner, we jump to present where Bernice has vanished. And Frank and Sheriff Art Skiley investigate her hardware store, finding blood splatter and package addressed to Ed Gein. In Ed's farmhouse, they discover an unimaginable nightmare. And this so far is fine. It's a little bit true. Not the whole Thanksgiving dinner thing, but, you know, at least we're a little bit true, all right? And there was actually a receipt, not a package for Ed Gein, but whatever. But at the house, they find bowls made from skulls, furniture upholstered with human skin, masks fashioned from faces, and all true. And like, Ryan Murphy doesn't need anything to dramatize that because it's as horrible as it gets. He was a monster. But just because you call a show monster doesn't mean you think he is. You're like heavily leaning into the fact that he was just this misunderstood guy who had relationships, but this is all false. Anyway, Frank's search leads to the barn where he finds his mother's headless body hanging upside down like butchered meat. True. That is true. And it's a devastating moment as a son discovers his mother's horrific fate. And Ed arrives during the investigation and is arrested while grief-stricken. And Frank attacks him. And under interrogation, Ed calmly admits to grave robbing and making keepsakes, but denies murder, even during a polygraph test. And Sheriff Skiley suspects Ed killed many more, possibly up to 200. But Ed's foggy memory prevents proving additional murders. Meanwhile, Adeline tries to sell her story to the media, but is ignored, reduced to a footnote in the horror she witnessed. So this episode is like the most loosely true so far up until this point, because Adeline did put in a quote where she's like, yeah, I know him so well, and she really wanted to sell her story and like be in the limelight for it, but she retracted everything 2 weeks later because there was just no way to prove that any of that happened. And she probably just had a conscience and she's like, oh, actually none of that happened. But the episode ends with Frank struggling to reclaim his mother's body from the morgue for burial, then attending Thanksgiving dinner at Skylie's house. But when the sheriff carves the turkey, Frank can only see visions of Ed dismembering Bernice. All shock value, we don't know this happened, whatever, and his trauma shattering any sense of normalcy. Again, awful. She's a real human being, and she was butchered in real life, and to just like portray that in just the most horrendous way is weird and disgusting. But they actually got some things true in this one. He actually was her Bernice's son. So there you go. And Watkins did give interviews to newspapers after Gein's arrest, but retracted all the statements. And Sheriff, I keep saying Skylie, sorry, it's Slee. I don't know why I read it like that. Did assault Gein during questioning, banging his head into a wall. So that's fine. I feel like this part is like dramatic enough for Ryan not to have to do anything besides, the carving turkey thing, which was just insane. But it's like the most accurate episode I think there is in the entire show. That brings us to episode 7, Ham Radio. Episode 7 finds Ed Gein declared legally insane and committed to a mental hospital instead of prison. True. While Deputy Frank Warden spirals into alcoholism, unable to cope with discovering his mother's butchered body. And Sheriff Slee tries to talk Frank out of his plan to sue Ed's estate and auction his grotesque belongings for revenge and money, warning that turning Gein's artifacts into public spectacle is wrong, but Frank is beyond reasoning. And at the asylum, Ed settles into a childlike routine when a friendly nurse nicknamed Salty offers to buy him items with money from his property sale. So Ed requests a ham radio, believing they'll let him speak with his idols, like Nazi criminal Isla Koch and transgender pioneer Christine Jorgensen. So Ed chats with Isla, who bonds with him over their shared imprisonment before taking matters into her own hands. And then calls Christine seeking guidance about his gender confusion. Obviously, all of this is like in his mind. He's later going to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, so I get that they're just trying to make him extra crazy and to like give context to this whole situation. He definitely was fixated with Isla and Jorgensen to a certain degree. How much, we don't know, but I get like trying to make those parallels. So wearing a suit of human skin, he describes his obsession with Christine, disturbed but compassionate, and tells him he's not transgender but gynophilic, which is being sexually fixated on female anatomy. This was never a thing. This was never a diagnosis that Ed got. The show, or Ryan Murphy specifically, just didn't want to connect transgenderism and gynophilicism together. He wanted to make sure that that was separate, which, why even say it in the first place if you're just going to make stuff up? It's weird. I don't really get it. Just let it be what it is. It's a guy wearing f***ing skin suits. We don't need a diagnosis for that. We got it. It's schizophrenia. So it was weird. I don't think it was necessary at all. And Ed's delusions escalate when the head nurse, Roz, cuts his privileges and he attacks her with a chainsaw one night, but she's perfectly fine the next morning. They do this as, I'm assuming, homage to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I think it's just for the shock value, gore value, obviously. Not needed at all. And then panicked, Ed confesses to the doctor, who delivers crushing truth, that the radios never worked. Isla and Christine were voices in his head. And he's diagnosed with schizophrenia, and Ed learns the voices that drove him to rob graves and kill came from untreated mental illness, which, most likely, he always said that it was his mother, mostly in his head all the time. Could it have been them? Sure. It's definitely creative liberties being taken, but the whole show is, so I just I'm tired at this point. The episode ends tenderly as the doctor promises medication to quiet the voices, and Ed sobs, hugs Roz, and takes his first pill, which is a moment of peace after a lifetime of madness. Oh, we have sympathy for him now. A guy that butchered human beings. Classic Ryan Murphy. And that brings us to episode 8, The Godfather. The conclusion advances toward the 1970s. depicting Ed Gein currently medicated and controlled within Wisconsin psychiatric care, becoming an unwilling investigative asset while approaching death because he was very sick at this point, and opening distant from Wisconsin, presenting disturbing Washington state events, which was an apparently supportive individual entices two females into transportation, renders one unconscious, and restrains both. And the identity reveals Ted Bundy. Oh, he's another crazy killer. I bet Ryan Murphy's gonna butcher that story as well. Oh man. Already intensifying his predatory offenses, and his violations and posthumous degradation parallel Ed's history. Oh, they connect. They connect murderers across periods. Following FBI pursuit of Bundy, investigators initially seek understanding from confined serial killer Jerry Brudos, receiving minimal assistance. Shout out to Mindhunter, who's actually accurate in their portrayal. Whoa, that's crazy. You could actually be accurate and still have a good show and honor the victims? That's what? That's crazy. And recalling earlier consultations, authorities approach Ed Gein, suspecting his degradation knowledge might enhance psychological analysis. And Ed cooperates in the show, appearing coherent through pharmaceutical intervention. And through analytical yet troubling discussion, Ed examines crime documentation, observing decapitation and specific tools, offering practical though gruesome intelligence for tracking Bundy's implements. And his disconnected evaluation remains unsettling, yet so valuable. All of that's fake. The FBI at one point came to Ed Gein to talk about him in general, not at all about Ted Bundy, and he literally gave them no information because he was so hopped up on drugs and so far gone in his health declining. They got nothing from Ed Gein. So they did do an interview with him, not about Ted Bundy, and they got nothing from him at all because he was so incoherent. So just light that shit up. Give me like 5 falses. Just absolutely insane and not necessary. Again, just like making shit up for no reason, just for the audience to be like, what? That really happened? It didn't. The episode depicts Ed collecting Bundy coverage, subsequently systemically developing personal assessments. And additionally introduced is murderer Richard Speck, who worships Ed through correspondence. That never happened either. Ed never talked to other serial killers. It's all made up. Certain letters describe admirers organizing comparable collegiate attacks in Florida. And Ed discreetly provides authorities this intelligence, facilitating identification, ultimately enabling Bundy's capture. All fake. All false. Not real. Light that shit up again. All false. And then time progresses, and Ed's institutional companion attendant Roz provides a terminal diagnosis: advanced pulmonary malignancy without treatment options. So during physical decline, Ed encounters an unanticipated guest, which is Adeline, and their exchange proves emotionally devastating. Never happened, by the way. Ed expresses pain regarding her absence, and Adeline admits personal psychological struggle, maintaining violent impulses she resists executing. False. Never happened. And he recommends pharmaceutical intervention, but she declines. Regardless, he professes affection. Never happened. He didn't care about women. There's a quote of him saying he doesn't care about women. And Ed expires shortly following, peacefully departing institutionally. And the program concludes through dreamlike, self-referential elements. And adolescents steal Ed's memorial marker, which did happen. A very uncommon fact. Encountering fictional creatures like Norman Bates, Buffalo Bill, and Leatherface, figures originating from Gein's actual atrocities. And then finally, Ed appears tranquilly seated alongside Augusta, who states, "Only mothers could love you." And Ed grins slightly, presenting audiences with a disturbing combination of sorrow and fear. Because we have to feel something. We have to feel something for hunky Charlie, what's-his-face, and Ed Gein, the guy who ripped apart innocent people in their graves and living human beings who butchered them like animals. Oh, we gotta feel something. What the f? But yeah, the whole show was just extremely frustrating. Again, I've said it so many times, but if you're making a show about a real person and real victims, I think there should be just a finite limit of creative liberties you're allowed to take. And there are some that I think are okay, with showing that he's schizophrenic and he might be hearing voices in his head, that he might be hearing his mother in his head. Fine, he said that was the case, that he was always doing it for his mother, but like making up actual crimes that happened and defaming human beings who are now deceased and can't defend themselves for creative liberties is disgusting, and I don't like it. I don't like it. But Ryan Murphy is undeniably, okay, let's start with this. He's undeniably a talented storyteller who has created some of television's most compelling dramas. But there's a disturbing pattern that runs through his true crime work, and it's a consistent tendency to transform real killers into romantic anti-heroes while the actual victims just fade into the background, or their stories are just completely made up and they're just absolutely just shit on. And this pattern all started with American Horror Story, with Murder House, where Murphy created Tate Langdon. And to his defense, this was made up technically. This is like the Psycho, where he took things from other events that happened and he at least made up a character. But it starts with Tate Langdon, a character directly inspired by the Columbine shooters, which is horrifying, and turned him into a tragic romantic lead played by Evan Peters, who's a great actor, but it's just disturbing. And for those of you who don't know, American high school seniors and mass murder duo who perpetrated the massacre at Columbine High School on April 20th, 1999 in Columbine, Colorado, killed 13 students and 1 teacher and wounded 23 others. So he saw that and he's like, I should make a character based off of that. That's great. And also make him romanticized and loved. And listen, I watched American Horror Story. I've watched it before, and I was absolutely one of those people who's like, oh, he's just misunderstood. He's a good guy. You know, who cares that he shot up a school and did all those bad things? Who cares? But now that I'm getting older and I've like taken the time to, you know, meet victims, talk to victims, be a victim myself in a certain way, it's so tone deaf. And I think there is a way to do it. I think there's a way to do it in just making them the monster, whereas you see Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Psycho and Patrick Bateman, they're clearly the monster, they're clearly evil, but this like weird need to make it romantic is like always Ryan Murphy's MO, because the show positioned Tate as like a tortured soul worthy of love and redemption, complete with a ghost romance subplot. And this was just our first warning sign of Murphy's troubling fascination with making monsters sympathetic. And the pattern just escalated with Dahmer, where Murphy cast Evan Peters again, and this time as Jeffrey Dahmer. And despite Murphy's insistence that the show wouldn't sympathize with Dahmer or be told from his perspective, the series repeatedly flashed back to Dahmer's lonely childhood, with his struggles with his parents' divorce and his isolation. And, you know, I get like it's important to the story. You need to know who this person is and where it came from. That's always why I do people's lives in chronological order and build up, because it's important to know. But it's like the way in which you choose to do that. Well, he's killing someone and mutilating them and injecting their head with acid. You can't just go back to, well, he was a little kid who got left home alone a lot. Who fucking cares? He's a monster, dude. But the show inadvertently, or perhaps deliberately, created empathy for a man who murdered and dismembered 17 people. And the result was TikTok fan edits making Dahmer look mysterious and alluring, and Twitter users thirsting over the actual mugshot of Jeffrey Dahmer, and viewers explicitly saying the show made them feel sorry for the real Dahmer. And if you haven't already watched this video on Jeffrey Dahmer, Dahmer drugged, killed, and then had relations with corpses before dismembering them and eating them, and kept trophies of his victims in his apartment to yak off to later. What a catch, right? And then with Monsters, the Menendez brothers, Murphy cast conventionally attractive actors, which, to be fair, they looked kind of similar to the real guys, so whatever, Nicholas Chavez and Cooper Koch, and set dramatic scenes to catchy 80s music and focused more on making the brothers look cool in their period-perfect outfits than on accurately depicting the abuse they claimed to have suffered. And yes, there are episodes in which the courtroom, it is word for word, and I do appreciate that, but it focused way more on stylization than what actually happened. And as one student actually noted, the Menendez brothers went through so much in their life, and the show barely cared to mention it. And even the Menendez brothers themselves said that the show was repulsive, that it was terrible. But the new low is with Monster, the Ed Gein story, as we have heard already. And that's that Murphy's approach reaches its most egregious extreme. The series doesn't just embellish, it completely fabricates major plot points in history, with inventing murders in the case of Evelyn Hartley, with sexualized violence, with the necrophilia scenes that never happened, and just I don't even know how many falses we had, but like, I'm gonna assume it's well over 50% of just not true things. It's crazy. But I really do think Ryan Murphy is a genius who has become just insidious because he knows exactly who his audience is and what they respond to. Research shows that true crime podcasts have 73% female audience. Obviously, hey queens, I know, it's me too, okay? And women are primary consumers of both true crime and shipping fiction, the kind of romanticized, often fan content that imagines relationships between characters. I'm not saying that's you. I think the people that watch this channel very much know that these people are horrifying, just wastes of oxygen, but there are a lot of, people that just romanticize the idea of being with these people. And Ryan Murphy capitalizes on that. And he deliberately exploits this by casting attractive, like overly attractive actors like Charlie Hunnam and Evan Peters and Cooper Koch. And to be fair, they do look similar to these people, but the fact that they're always just like, I don't know, like 20, 30, 40% more attractive, that's Hollywood, that's Hollywood. And, what is he supposed to do? Cast somebody who looks like them, but like slightly uglier or something like that, like whatever. But the biggest thing is creating these completely false romantic subplots that never existed and adding this sexual tension and homoerotic undertones like the Menendez brothers implied incest, which is why are you doing that? Focusing on the killer's emotional backstories rather than the victim's suffering. And as Sarah Didham notes in Unheard, quote, Murphy understands what people want to see. Monster brings together the trash sensibility of horror story. Watch these hot brothers kiss with the truth-telling pretensions of crime story, unquote. And I couldn't agree more. That's like the way more well said than I said it. The psychology behind women's fascination with violent men is complex. Some argue it's about understanding potential threats, which I can sympathize with, especially, being a victim of those kinds of things. And others suggest it's about the fantasy of taming dangerous men. But whatever the reason, Murphy cynically leverages this fascination to create what amounts to true crime fan fiction, taking real murders and transforming them into sexualized entertainment. And when he defends his shows by saying, quote, we show many, many, many perspectives, unquote, or claims he's teaching controversy, he's hiding behind artistic license to justify exploitation. And that's my biggest problem. Because there are real costs to these creative liberties. One, and the most major one, is re-traumatizing victims' families. For example, the families of Dahmer's victims called the series of Dahmer, Ryan Murphy's Dahmer, re-traumatizing over and over again. Who's the real monster? I think it's Ryan Murphy. And the Menendez family called their portrayal repulsive, which I already mentioned. And the second being spreading blatant misinformation, because there's some viewers that watch these shows that believe they're based on true events and come away with completely false information. They think Ed Gein really, had relations with dead bodies, or that he actually killed Evelyn and all this bullshit, and he actually helped catch Ted Bundy and had a murderous girlfriend. All false, and all like the main plot points of this entire show. And then there's glorifying violence unnecessarily by making killers attractive, sympathetic, and even romantic. And Murphy's shows just contribute to the culture that turns murderers into celebrities. The fan edits, the thirsting tweets, the romanticization. Murphy doesn't just predict this response, he deliberately cultivates it. But there is something we need to establish now. And that is that there's a massive ethical difference between thirsting over Dexter Morgan and, thirsting over Jeffrey Dahmer. One is a fictional character, and the other murdered 17 real people with real families who are still grieving. Because when we watch fictional killers like Dexter Morgan, Joe Goldberg from You, or Patrick Bateman, we're engaging with fantasy. These characters exist solely for our entertainment. No real person died. No actual mother lost her actual son. No family has to see their loved one's death turned into a Netflix binge session. And we can explore dark themes, examine the psychology of violence, even find these characters compelling because they're not real. But when Ryan Murphy takes Ed Gein, a man who skinned actual women, who destroyed real families, and gives him the Charlie Hunnam treatment, complete with moody lighting and fictional romance subplot, he's not creating entertainment, in my opinion. He's just rewriting history to fit his fucked up, romanticized narrative. And you can think about it this way. When Anthony Hopkins plays Hannibal Lecter, he's bringing a fictional monster to life. But when Evan Peters plays Jeffrey Dahmer, he's bringing a real monster back to life. And again, I'm not blaming the actors for this necessarily. It's just, I feel like we don't think about this enough. And I think about it way too much, probably. I'm making this video and probably people are like, oh, you're thinking too much into it and all this stuff. It's like when my life like revolves around this lately. I mean, I come out with a new video every week. Like I'm looking into this stuff on a daily basis. I get less desensitized. I feel more empathy than ever. And so watching shows like this that just defame and embarrass and belittle victims, it's sick. And when you bring these real monsters back to life and aren't honest about who they really were and what their stories really were and what the victims actually went through, one whose victims' families have to relive their trauma every time someone makes another TikTok edit set to a Lana Del Rey song, it's disheartening to think about. The problem isn't that we're fascinated by darkness. That's just human nature. There's a reason why I do so much true crime and why we're so fascinated by it. I think it just makes sense. The problem is when creators deliberately blur the line between fiction and reality, using the same cinematography, the same attractive casting, the same romantic framing for both invented killers and actual murderers. Ryan Murphy is training audiences to see no difference between a character and a criminal. And that's not art. That's just exploitation wearing designer clothes. So in general, and since Netflix greenlit it, I'm putting them into this thing, but you know, their work represents the worst of true crime entertainment, prioritizing the killers over their victims, fantasy over fact, and profit over people. And they've proven they can make compelling television, but the question is whether he or they can or will ever make ethical television when it comes to portraying real life violence. I don't know. And to be fair, there are plenty of good shows, even Netflix original shows, that do a pretty good job of this. You know, one of them being Mindhunter. They take creative liberties, but they don't absolutely shit on the truth like Ryan Murphy loves to. And there's plenty of documentaries that, of course, have kind of paint their own narrative, but they don't stray from the actual truth. It's all fact in there. So I'm good with that. You know, I like to learn about that stuff, and you know, it has, you know, testimony from the actual victims happening, and it's just yeah, that whole time watching it, I just felt sick and disappointed and just angry. I felt angry, and I don't even have anything to do with this. And, you know, feel free to disagree with me in the comments. I know that I'm a bit passionate about this kind of stuff, but I think that's good. I think we need compassion, and we shouldn't, I mean, it's just another thing where we shouldn't believe everything we see. You should always research it yourself. But if I have to Google, you know, every 2 minutes of a show if it's actually true, and most of it's not, I don't think it's a good show, especially if it's based off of a real killer and real victims and all that kind of stuff. So what do I know, though? I'm just a YouTuber. Anyway, really fun Saturday video. But I love true crime. I love true crime. I think it's absolutely fascinating. I think the dark things in the world are so fascinating because they're possible and because it's scary. Also because it's real. It's real, and these are real people, and I think it's horrible. And I do like highlighting the fact that there are real life monsters out there who do real life things to real life people, and there's consequences from that. And if there's anything I can do to give back to people that have gone through that or going through that, I will do that, and I will continue to do that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with liking true crime, obviously. But I think the way it's portrayed in media, oftentimes with Ryan Murphy, it's just too many creative liberties. I think sticking to the truth is enough. I don't think you need to make stuff up in a world that's already full of pure darkness, personally. But what do I know? Anyway,